autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders are exploding all around the world. Could wireless radiation be one of the overlooked factors driving this tragedy? You're listening to the 2025 EMF Hazard Summit. My name is Nick Pinault, the EMF guy, and this is the EMF Hazard Summit, Protect Your Children. In this presentation, Harvard-trained scientist Dr. Martha Herbert reviews the concerning ways that wireless technology can interfere with proper brain development and shares the top ways we can protect our children from these risks. Dr. Martha Herbert is a pediatric neurologist, neuroscientist, systems thinker, and writer. She is a former faculty member in neurology at the Massachusetts General Hospital, Harvard Medical School. She has a special interest in bioelectricity of life as compared with industry-generated EMFs. I'm here today with Dr. Martha Herbert. How are you, Dr. Herbert?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. And thanks so much for taking the time. I've been following your work since the beginning for me, which was around 2016 when I started getting into the dangers of EMFs and starting to understand these things. I was especially surprised because, of course, you were part of the Harvard Medical School at the time. And for me, what was difficult in EMFs is this idea from a lot of people that, oh no, this is a fringe topic. There are no serious scientists looking at the issue. And yet I came across your paper, for example, the one you published around 10 years ago, around the plausibility of a link between EMF exposure and autism. Do you want to talk about that work in particular and what prompted you to look into it? Because EMF, I know, is not a topic that is this approachable for most people. So why did you decide to publish on it?
Well, it has a number of facets to it. My first exposure to the idea that EMF might be a problem was like 22 years ago. It was at a meeting in the mountains of Santa Cruz, and a woman who edited a magazine called the Wild Duck Review, and I had published something in her magazine about children's developmental issues. It was an interview with me, and she was raising concerns, and I thought, I don't know just about anything about this, but I'm going to keep my eyes open. So that's what the response was that I had to that exposure. And then in 2007, somebody called me up and said to me, my daughter has leukemia. We moved into an ecological housing development. And now it turns out that the power lines are going right under our house. Do you think that there's a connection? So that upped the ante. Meanwhile, in the autism world, I had gotten really interested in the biology of, the immune system, the mitochondrial energy metabolism, the all kinds of things that make that people in the more integrative clinical community had been looking at. And I learned a lot about that physiology. And then I wrote a book. I got asked to write a book by Harvard Health Publications, and it's called The Autism Revolution. And I went through in 10 chapters, from basic core metabolism to environment, immune, microbiome. And the center of the chapter 5 was the brain. And I talked about the astrocytes. The astrocytes have been neglected. They were considered to be handmaidens to the neurons. And then people started finding out that they actually did real stuff, as opposed to just being housekeeping cells. And they get really disorganized when there's inflammation or other things going on. And that creates a situation where the inflammation creates pretty much electrical static in the system, because there's too much going on at the chemical level. And So Cindy Sage read my book, and she said, I have to talk to this woman because that's what's going on. That's probably the linchpin for how the EMF exposures are connected with autism. And I avoided talking with her, but when she called me up, I was in a waiting room at an airport, and she told me that it was about the astrocytes. And I thought, okay, well, in this case, I'll work with her because she actually has some kind of rationale here. She was too strongly trying to get me to claim that autism is caused by EMF. But I know that there's so many things that are in the mix. And
Yeah.
I'm an advocate of a total load model, where it's a cumulative impact. The technical term is allostatic load of all the stuff that you've been exposed to. But I took it on anyway, and I said, this is what I know about all of these different pathophysiological problems in autism. So let me look them up in EMF and see if they're there. And boy, were they there.
Yeah.
So what I had already come to this term called environmentally vulnerable physiology. Basically, vulnerable physiology is the network systems of all kinds that constantly adjust our bodies and any organism's bodies to the changes in internal and external environments. And they aren't specific to any one physiological system. And when they come to be exposed to what I'm not the only one who calls it new to nature technologies, which includes synthetic chemicals, toxic chemicals, pharmaceuticals that are patented and you can't, so these are the things I was just saying. The industry needs to patent things, and when they patent things, they don't want competition. And then not only that, the corporations who invent them and patent things, they get their own. They buy off people in the regulatory agencies, so they don't really test it very aggressively. They don't test these things very aggressively. So it's been 29, 30 years since the current standards were set for EMF, and these standards were based on a very small number of tests of very static exposures on a small number of laboratory animals. And there weren't people walking around with cell phones. I mean, it was nothing like it is today. And you probably have other people talking about that, so I won't dwell on it. But I'm changing slides now. What I want to talk about is that the EMF messes up both there's one brain, but it has dimensions to it. So the metabolism, the molecular, the wet brain, the fluids, and then the electrical functional brain, they're different dimensions of the same system. And what I did in my paper, which is posted on my website in two parts. My website is drmarthaherbert.com, and under publications, you can find the paper, Autism and EMF, the plausibility of the pathophysiological link. So what I tried to show is some of the core impacts. I mean, this is a summary. That paper has like hundreds of footnotes, but in broad categories, it degrades brain tissue and function. If you have an exposure to EMF when you're a small child, it goes through the skull so much easier than with people with thicker skulls who are older, who've grown more. And I show here some of the things that happen. There's more stress response. The melatonin that allows you to sleep is depleted. The sleep architecture of the electrical signals in your brain are changed. The brain waves are different. It's more disorganized in terms of signaling. It can increase seizure risk. And these are all things that have not really been studied very well because it was declared without rigorous testing, that it isn't necessary to study exposures of electromagnetic fields if they don't heat the tissue. and that's bogus because it's turning out there's an enormous amount of evidence that you don't need to heat the tissue. You don't need to cause ionize. It's not like ionizing radiation, and it isn't just heat. It's on a much more subtle level. There's alteration of physiological integrity, and it creates a level of chaos that undermines the coherence of the way the system should work together. And this concept of coherence is really important. In the brain, I've done a lot of brain research, and in EEG and MEG research, you can measure how coherent different brain waves in different parts of the system are with each other. And when they become less coherent, there's less organization, and learning processes and coordination of activities is degraded. But this is also the case for other biological systems, the immune system, the microbiome. All of these systems work together, and when this quality of chaos from a new to nature type of signal gets involved, the system doesn't know how to handle it. So in 2008, I read a book called Rhythms of the Brain by Buzaki. He was, I think at that time he was at NYU and he went to Rutgers or vice versa. And I noticed that there were square waves that they used to use for research, and then the neuroscientists stopped studying the brain with square waves because they realized that no biological organisms have square waves. They have curved sine waves, but it turns out that, so then a number of years later, I read the book again, and at this point I was already attuned to EMF, and I found out that the EMF waves are square waves. They're square waves with spikes. And this is nothing like what any living organism communicates with. Electromagnetic communication in living organisms is very delicate, and it's very important. And I recently, the National Cancer Institute recently sponsored a conference online, you can see it online, about electromagnetic fields and the development of cancer. And they said that what they're learning is so potent that it undermines the idea that it's all about cell lines and things at the biological and chemical level. This is something that was noted a long time ago by the author of the Body Electric book, but he took a lot of heat for saying these things. But now there's more and more evidence coming from other people. So these brain waves, they degrade brain tissue and function. And this can happen. It's particularly vulnerable before conception. If you're exposed to EMF when you're a woman, you can have your eggs, and you carry your eggs as a woman for your whole reproductive period. And if they're damaged or altered by something like this kind of radiation exposure, you're at risk for problems. And then also it's been demonstrated that men who carry cell phones in their pockets are at greater risk of having problems with their sperm, although they keep generating new ones. Women who use laptops on their laps increase risk to children in their womb and their ovary and eggs for the future. And infancy, the baby monitors emit a lot of EMF, and people don't know this, and they put them right next to the baby's head in the crib. And that's not a good thing. That these are things which people need to know and be careful of. Now, I would want to pause, Nick, and ask you if you have anything you want to ask me at this point.
Sure. And maybe we can just pause sharing here for a second.
Sure.
I'm wondering if now you're part of the ICBE EMF group, which I told Paul Heroux in this separate interview we did for this online summit just this week, that I consider it one of the top groups of scientists that might have, I guess, influence to counter the sort of bad science we see coming out of the WHO. But to me, what is the saddest part of this is that you've published, the fact that there's a plausible link between EMFs and autism over 10 years ago. Has anyone else published anything of interest since? Have you seen this link discussed at all or evolving in a direction where we get better answers?
That's a good question. I mean, I hear people talking about it for sure, but at the level of the science, I was involved up until the pandemic started. I was working with a colleague who was going to fund a study of where we would it would be a study of people who had a kid that already had autism in their homes, and we would have a 3-stage process. And the first stage would be very standardized, but not very standardized, but basically that would be the off and away, just doing an initial home inspection that we would guide them through. And let's say the child is sleeping on a wall, and behind the wall, there's an electrically generating thing. You would move the bed or move that thing. You wouldn't have things in the room where the child sleeps. And you would do basic things like that that don't cost money and don't mean that you have to hire a contractor to fix things. And do baseline measurements of the functionality, the way the emotions and the sleep and the various other things. And then 2 weeks later, after you remove everything, measure again and see what happened. And then we would have options to do somewhat more elaborate, and then major league more elaborate things with also before and after measures. And this was inspired by a paper by Dietrich Klinghardt. It might even have just been a poster in 2002 where he did some kind of survey work and noted that women with children with autism had something like, I don't remember the exact number, but 20 times as much EMF exposure in the bedroom while they were gestating. But then the pandemic happened, and it was really hard to do anything. I was involved in another kind of study in Canada that just got cut off. And it's just now we're picking up the pieces. Now there's a study being organized, I don't know how far along it is, by the Building Biology Institute that I've heard about, but I'm not involved with it. It seems to be trying to do what we were trying to do. I've been up to my ears with other things, so I haven't gotten involved with it. But I think that would be good because they would design. And there's another person also who's interested. That I don't want to go into that. That's not, good use of our collective time. But I don't know of efforts beyond that have really gone further. And I did a presentation for ICBE EMF privately, inspired by an EEG researcher who came and spoke to us. He didn't come, virtually. He came, and he only did leads in a few parts of the brain. And I'm looking at this, and I became interested in neurofeedback and other things in relation. It was sort of like the positive side of what knowing about electromagnetic activity, and just that the people who are in academia, when you want to do research, it costs a fortune. There's all kinds of institutional costs, and then the methodologies are relatively conservative, whereas the people doing quantitative EEG, studying interactions of the whole brain, and the clinical community are mostly outside of academia or at the edges of it, but they are more free thinkers. And there was a whole panel at a conference of these people a number of months ago talking about EMF, and I haven't heard the whole story about it because I had to take a break from this, and I had some other pressing projects which are just getting completed. But I don't really. I mean, I don't think part of it is that when you study things in little pieces, the brain is constantly networking itself And when you just study a piece of the networking as opposed to some of the methods that allow you to integrate all the information, you don't really learn as much about what's going on. So I
Hmm.
think that the bottom line is when I get shake loose from some of the projects I have to complete right now, I would like to at least somehow contribute to having it be done in that fashion. And I do have some people who are lined up with me on that score.
And if I can add a personal comment, this should be NIH funding. I mean, the big money should be there in a perfect world for scientists to say, okay, we have these new technologies. We have children that have not only autism, but ADHD, ADD, depression, anxiety, and whatnot. And are there links that we can find based on exposure levels, prenatal exposures? This is kind of stuff that should be done
Yeah,
before
I
rolling
know
out
it
the
should be
technology.
done,
But, you
but they
know,
don't do it. It's
no,
not the fact
no.
of life. I mean, I hope that we get some kind of shift in this because they just declare that what they figured out 29 years ago is still complete and valid and so forth,
Yeah.
which it's not. And people don't have a say in the matter. And I had a lot of difficulty before I started getting into EMF, and I had a number of studies proposed to do metabolic measures in more of a panel to look at how they interacted. And the amount of institutional support I got at my hospital was zilch. They were not interested. It was an adult hospital. They actually got rid of 250 refrigerators full of samples, including irreplaceable monkey brain uh, specimens. So, it's not like people just give you money and everything is there. It's actually much more complicated than that. And that's one of the reasons I'm sitting here um, in a remote place with this field behind me. It actually still has more leaves in it than right now. That was from last year, this picture. But it's amazing how much you can still do out here. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of people are trying to figure out how to do more on the ground science. And that's what I like about the independent EEG people is doesn't cost a lot of money to own that equipment and to use the software. So I feel like, and they also do lab tests. They do blood and urine tests. And so I've been I've been very interested in coordinating that kind of thing, um, and or at least having somebody do it because I think that's until the NIH is transformed, uh, we're not going to really. I mean, there's an old saying that I saw in the I Ching many years ago. It was a commentary, and it said, "He beats his head against a wall, and in consequence feels himself oppressed by the wall." So I don't feel like doing that. So I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Other people, if they want to do it, they can do it, but it's not me anymore.
Hmm. But it's interesting. I'll chase down that lead a little bit. The neurofeedback conference. I did hear Dr. Robert Turner,
Yeah, he's the
who.
one I'm connecting with.
Okay, well, I'll have to connect with him to learn about that conference. It really surprised me when he said that in this attendance it was fairly recognized that EMFs can interfere with EEG because of course you see it you see it very easily. You just
Right.
have to have a patient that is hooked in with a phone call and it will see changes and maybe then you can argue about what these changes mean, but surely they are not conclusive to the best brain waves that we know are conclusive of health.
No.
They're disruptive in their nature.
Yeah, so you can show that there are changes, and then you can play with different softwares that measure things like that and see which ones measure which parts of it.
Yeah.
And I had proposed that we have a think tank with these people. And I just wrote to Robert Turner last week saying, look, I've been writing all these papers and and oh man, I mean it's been a lot of work.
Yeah.
And but I'm almost done with it. And I have two more things to do with this other thing, and then I can talk to you. And he wrote back and said, "Oh, it's good you wrote me, but right now I'm going to in vacation in France. I'll talk to you in a couple of weeks."
Yeah, yeah,
But
I
it's
know,
not
and
really,
I've been also collaborating with other scientists, and I'm also busy. It's difficult to align our efforts to create change. But I think that just the fact that you ended up, finding the topic of EMFs and publishing on it was already very influential. It was influential for me. It was influential for other groups. So we each try, to build each other. And I love that you're also involved with ICBE. Maybe in closing, what is your current understanding of what people should do? Not
Yeah,
all
sure.
scientists want to talk about, the action steps, but I know you're also, you were at Harvard Medical School, so you're also in public health. What do you think
Right. And
is
I'm a
the level?
clinician. I mean, I'm a child neurologist.
Yeah, exactly. So what is the level of precaution that parents should take when it comes to devices towards their children, or maybe in pregnancy at different levels of life? What is your
right.
current understanding of how concerned we should be about these exposures?
You might I can share again because I can flip
Sure.
through some slides really. This is a slide just about total load. And when you have too many noxious exposures, you get more fragile. And when you have poor defenses in other areas of your life, you don't have enough resilience. And quite some time ago, I found this book, The Environmental Threats to Human Intelligence. So this here is a wetlands that's resilient, the green on top, and this is a mess. This is a spoiled wetlands, and that's not resilient. That's just a metaphor. It's a good book, by the way. I don't know if it's still around. And you want to deal with inflammation. This is an astrocyte with too much inflammation in the brain, which causes brain noise, mitochondrial dysfunction, your energy systems aren't working, and oxidative stress. Let me go to the next slide. Oh, I'm hitting the wrong thing. And I already said that, sorry. Oh, and this is a picture of in autism. In a neurotypical person, the blue is signal and the red is noise. And in an autistic group, the difference is there's more noise. It has more power but less coherence. I'm not going to dwell on that because it's going to take too long. These are the things that, you don't even have a proper developmental period because you're so busy playing with your devices. Here are some of the many things that you can do. Now, first of all, I'm not going here into some of the things that are really directly about just EMF, because I'm hoping that you have other people who are telling people a lot of the stuff.
For sure.
And you need to also take account of it's not just the EMF and then everything else is fine. If you're eating a lot of junk or low nutrient density foods, your body is not going to be able to generate resiliency. Of course, you need to avoid exposures to intense electromagnetic fields. You should have an EMF meter and take it around with you and learn how to measure and minimize hazards, which I'm sure people are hearing about in this summit, and learn how to shield. Get involved with people who are supporting efforts to increase the safety of chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and EMF technologies. I've worked with the Children's Health Defense.
Great.
I did similar work on some environmental exposures 10 years ago. I wrote an introduction to one of Bobby Kennedy's books then. And they are the most comprehensive organization that I know. They're not just doing EMF, they're doing the whole disaster of what's going on. And then also, go outside and engage with people in nature and learn to do real physical things in the world. As I kind of indicated, I've moved to a rural environment, and I live with Mennonites now. And I'm watching, when I came here to check out whether I was out of my mind to move here or whether it was a really good idea, the single thing that most impressed me was the children. The children were healthy. They were agile. I could carry on a sustained back and forth conversation with a 3-year-old. I could watch someone have, really good motor coordination, doing all kinds of things. And, in my practice as a child neurologist, I remember when I first started working, it took me 5 years before I saw neurotypical kids. As part of a research study, they had two kids come in who were perfectly normal, didn't have trouble walking or coordinating their hands or their feet or whatever. But what the kids are doing around here, they go out, they collect the eggs, they bring the cow in, they milk the cow, and all kinds of things like that. And there's something that we really lost sitting around looking at our devices. And I saw it was, I have so much that I'm learning here that I never got to learn because I grew up in cities. So, so I'm trying from this vantage point to still stay in the discourse, even though I'm not in a lab. It's just not the time I want to be in a lab. There's plenty of things that I can measure here, and I'm setting stuff up with a fellow scientist.
Sure. And given the impact of your work and the environment you're in now, I think you're going to add great productive years to your life by living in a great environment in nature instead of, being stuck in a lab. And that work is important too. But, I see how many of my colleagues are moving out of cities in the countryside with their families and just spending more time in nature. And there's just nothing that can replace that to this day. We haven't been able to bottle nature, or bottle the sun or bottle any of it. So we still need to. Yeah.
I just want to do a plug for the second year of the Children Health Defense forum. This last year it was 1 year, and this year was 2 on the attack on food and farming. And it's no accident. It was not a kind of an automatic process that everybody moved out of cities, out of the farmland. It was really a kind of a plan that wasn't the choice of the people who had this happen to them. I have two generations ago, everybody in my lineage was rural. And even in even the earlier parts of my mother and father's lives were rural. Even in Brooklyn, it was rural. You could fish and grow things.
Yeah.
And that's gone. And or at least it's much more, and it's still going on. And it's a similar process. These things are all interconnected. So I think it's just important to realize that this is an EMF thing. It's a really big deal. There's a lot of other reasons for it than just getting us to do our cute things on our cute phones. But that's interconnected with other things. So I think people should keep that in mind.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for your insights. I'm very glad to learn from you directly that you're still involved in so many projects. I hope you can finish them. I can read the papers, and I'm really, really grateful for your contribution on this topic, really. And I know that people will appreciate this presentation so much. So thank you so much.
And I'll be getting this more out in public media as it matures, which is going to be relatively soon. So
I'm looking forward to it. I know you have your website. Sorry, I forgot to mention drmarthaherbert.com. Are there any other links you want to share?
Yes,
I don't know if you...
Higher Synthesis Foundation.
Okay.
So the link is shortened. It's higher, HIGHERSYNTH FDTN. You can also say Higher Synthesis Foundation, but it's more typing, .org. And that's going to be upgraded in the near future because it's not reflecting my current activities, and neither is my drmarthaherbert.com website because I moved here, a few years ago, and I'm not really seeing patients at this point because I have all these other things I need to, get going. But I mean, the basic principles are the same. But the part about the clinical life, I think I indicated on there that I'm not taking patients right now. So.
Perfect. And that foundation, is it something where people can donate, support your work? I know that's something I usually invite people at the end of these interviews. If you accept donations from the public.
I do accept donations.
Okay.
I do. And yes.
Perfect.
So I will, so I'd like to say a little bit more after we're done, so I can say a little bit more about that.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much again for your presence. I hope that people in the public can also encourage your work. That's something I always say. If there's a nonprofit or self-funded scientist or partially funded by the public, I always encourage people to be generous. So thank you. Thank you again for your time. I really hope that you liked this presentation. If you want to take action on what you just heard, you'll find links to everything that was mentioned by our guest speaker right underneath this interview. If you love this summit and want to own the recordings in audio, video, and written form for all of these 2025 interviews, make sure to click the buttons on this page to get the 2025 EMF pack. This EMF pack is heavily discounted during the summit launch and for a very limited time. Remember that every purchase supports my work as an independent citizen journalist, as well as the nonprofit partners that are associated with this summit. Thank you for your attention and support, and I'll see you in the next presentation.